Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. Thursday, October 31st. The city streets of Emberton are desolate for the holiday on account of the rain. Hidden in the silence is the element, waiting to strike like snakes. And I'm in there too, watching. Too many years of nights have turned me into a nocturnal animal. I must choose my targets carefully. It's a big city. I can't be everywhere. But you don't know where I am. You think I'm hiding in the shadows. But I am the shadows. I'm the winter wind, the chill in the breeze blown in from up north on that foggy fall air. I am the lone pale figure standing starkly before those dark, towering walls of pine. I'm the defective detective. I am Frostbyte Freeman. And this is my confession.
I'm a strange guy.
Really?
Yeah, I worry. I mean, little things bother me. I'm a worrier.
I'm sorry to bother you, ma'am. I just wanted to ask you one more question.
What is it?
There's one other thing I wanted to talk to you about. It's rather personal.
To bring you up to speed on my findings in this case thus far, in my last video on Whitepine, I came to the conclusion that the murder of Mysticat was committed by the butler Ivo on behalf of a member of the Hemlocks as a means to cover up the poisoning of Pyrocyphe. Notably, however, there were still several questions left unanswered in my theory, and in the time that's elapsed since then, I've discovered that these unanswered questions came from unfilled holes in my explanation. Errors I made that resulted in a less than clear picture of the series as a whole, clues I overlooked, details I missed. You see, these things, they just bother me, you know? But after approaching the case from a different angle by traveling down a different trail through the landscape to sharpen my point of view, I've come to the conclusion that while my conclusions and suspects still miraculously stand unscathed, the story of how we arrive at those conclusions looks a little different than I initially thought. So I want to tell you that story. I want to return to the grounds of Whitepine Manor in order to revise my theories and provide you with a more conclusive account of the crime. Nothing will be overlooked this time. No stone left unturned. I need to be even more thorough, even more exhaustive in my analysis. Nothing will escape me. I promised I was going to solve this case, and solve it I will. And I'll scour each and every last inch of the manor if I have to. Except for the basement. Those of you who watched my last video will remember that my model of the manor was less than complete, shall we say, in regards to its lower subterranean quarters, and I'm still having a bit of trouble with the renovations, so to speak. So, for the time being, we're just going to steer clear of that thing down there. It's just unsafe, really, too dangerous, too weird. It was deeply inappropriate and unprofessional of me to even bring it up in the first place, and I apologize profusely. There's nothing down there. Got it? Okay, good. Now then, let's review. In my last theory, I overlooked two crucial details about the crime that I want to return to now in order to smooth out the newfound wrinkles in my speculation. First, Bitotter was not the one who discovered Mysticat's body, and therefore couldn't have been the one who screamed. Second, the damage to Mysticat's body was much more extensive than I initially assumed, with her entire arm torn off, in addition to the multiple stab wounds littered across her torso. All told, both of these details combined have the potential to completely unravel the timeline of events we've constructed leading up to the murder. Once more, we must straighten out the knots in this tangled string of truth to solve this mystery. So let's unpack the implications of these new developments one by one, and in the process we'll see how they only further deepen our understanding of the case and strengthen the rhetoric of our speculation. First, the issue of who discovered the body. I initially assumed that Bitotter was the one who happened upon Misty on the dais in the foyer, given both his disappearance into the dining hall prior to the screams being heard, and the phrasing of the questions in their interrogation with the police. But as pointed out by Finn Sanity, a member of the theorist community responsible for writing the full transcripts of every episode of the series, I was wrong, and Bit isn't actually the one who discovered the body. I had to scrub back through the footage in the kitchen frame by frame, and after heightening the exposure just a tad to make it easier to see, I discovered they were right there the whole time, hidden behind this very large head-shaped ham hock. Well, Bit might have ham on his face, but I definitely have egg on mine. This is a pretty embarrassing mistake for me to make, especially since Bit being the one to discover the body is the assumption that the initial foundation of my theorization is entirely predicated on. But if Bit didn't discover the body, who did? Based on what we know for sure, the members of the household closest to the body now would be the 3 Hemlocks confirmed to be in the study, which would be Pyro, Izzy, and Moo. But the meeting in episode 2 seems to suggest that spending silent time together in the study every morning is something of a routine for the family, meaning that as they leave the study and enter the grand foyer to retire back to their respective rooms, they would happen upon the body naturally. We've only received visual confirmation that 3 of the Hemlocks, again, Moo, Izzy, and Pyro, were in the study together that morning, but there are still more seats on the opposite side of the room that the family could be sitting in that would be hidden just out of frame. In fact, we've seen them doing this 3 times now in the series, so it's fairly safe to assume that this is something of a routine. Zombie, Zam, and V are the 3 other Hemlocks we don't have a metatextual alibi for, but given this new information and their proximity to the body immediately after the fact, it's entirely possible that they were there in the study with the rest of the family after all. Now, the scream analysis we did last time still has some utility, in that it proves that both the screams occur together as a couplet. With Bit ruled out as the one who discovers the body, I'll grant that at least now there could potentially be multiple screamers. Maybe one is Moo and one is Izzy, or both screams came from either Izzy or Moo. I'm assuming that the screamer is one of these two since V is too busy vomiting, Zombie's countenance is too well schooled to break, we all know what Zam sounds like, and we actually hear Pyro's screams separated from everyone else's as he stands upon the dais when we enter the foyer. But more importantly, even if Bit wasn't the one who discovered the body and subsequently screamed, it's still highly unlikely that even the first scream was Misty's and the second came from the group of individuals who discovered the body. Remember, they're only 3.7 seconds apart. If the first was Misty's and the second came from one of the Hemlocks, there was no way they wouldn't have spotted the killer in the act, given the degree of damage done to her corpse. Additionally, even in light of all this new evidence, I still don't think it's likely that both screams could have come from Misty too. Misty had no reason to suspect she was in danger, and thus no reason to be afraid of the killer, presumably someone she knew and trusted until it was too late. To that end, the first stab wound would catch her completely off guard, and would be the most pivotal for the murder to place tactically, likely delivered to the jugular to silence her screams and render her incapable of speech. Otherwise, the game would be up, and they would have no chance to escape before being spotted, given how open and exposed the foyer is. There's just too many moving parts and assumptions we would have to make were both the screams to come from Mysticat, and once again, the simplest explanation is likely the correct one. This transitions us naturally into my analysis of the second detail I overlooked, the extent of the fatal wounds Misty sustained. Using a magnifying glass on an old copy of the Emberton Wire, upon closer inspection of the crime scene photographs, I discovered that the damage done to her body was much more severe than I initially assumed. In fact, it appears that one of her arms had been torn clean off. Severed, specifically, is the word the paper uses to describe the dislocation of her arm. But severing, however, is an act which presupposes a degree of precision, not possible through brute strength alone. The assailant was likely using some sort of bladed weapon then. A large knife would still be possible, especially given that many of the other incisions on her body were determined to be stab wounds. But with a weapon of that size, with a knife of that size, cutting off an entire limb would still take a fair bit of time and an awful lot of force. Time that our leading suspect, Ivo, doesn't have under our current interpretation, since the grand foyer of the manor is such an exposed location, with countless vantage points from which he could have been spotted during the act. And it's here where Bit not being the one to discover the body actually bails my theory out. Because if Bit isn't the one who finds Misty, and he's actually in the kitchen the whole time, then this means that when Ivory cuts from the hall to the kitchen, there is an implied jump in time, chronologically giving Ivo a much more generous window of opportunity in which to do the dirty deed. This, though, means that the murder would have to be predetermined after all. But if that's the case, why select such a precarious position for the killing? And why would Ivo go through all the trouble of cutting Misty's entire arm off? Well, luckily for us, Whitepine's 3rd episode has the answer. And I do mean answer, singular, because the answers to these 2 questions are one and the same. This was a symbolic slaying. Remember, my theory still holds that Ivo killed Misty on behalf of whichever Hemlock is poisoning Pyro, either Zombie to prevent his son from inheriting the company when he dies out of spite, or one of his siblings like Izzy to claim the inheritance as their own. None of the Hemlocks nor the police of Emberton are looking too deeply into Misty's death. After all, she was only a servant. Thus, the only people who would actually investigate her untimely passing are the only people who actually cared about her, the only people who would actually harbor suspicions, her fellow servants, and Pyro. Brazenly slaughtering her out in the open and mangling her body in such a dramatically distorted fashion sends a very clear message to the entire manor. Don't ask questions, or you're next. And we can see that, whoever they are, the killer's strategy has worked. Clown Pierce, ever the well-ironed professional and former soldier, has fully snapped back into military mode, trying to run a tight ship and keep his subordinates from collapsing into hysteria and panic by forbidding them from speaking on the subject. Seraptor, too, discourages Ivory from looking any deeper into the killing, trying to console her by conveying sympathy through his own lived experience. Nobody at Whitepine wants to talk about the brutal, vicious mutilation of a fellow maid, and an air of unease has blown in through the front door, carried by the frigid fall breeze. If this was meant to be a symbolic slaying, it certainly succeeded. But even if the killer needed the body to be discovered on the dais to achieve this symbolic effect, why take the risk of killing Misty then and there? Wouldn't it have made more sense to murder her in advance than deposit her corpse in the entryway later? Well, no. Taking into account the missing arm and the severity of her wounds, in addition to all the blood on the ground around the body, there would definitely be a trail of miscellaneous viscera leading from the entrance to the spot where the maid's corpse was stashed. Too messy, too much left to chance. And, furthermore, the foyer wasn't as risky of a venue for this symbolic slaying as I've led you to believe. In my last video, I mentioned that there were 7 separate angles from which the killer could have been caught in the act as a reason for why the murder might not have been premeditated. And while that is true, it also overlooks one of the most critical components of premeditated acts of violence. The perpetrator can rig the odds in their favor. So yes, there are 7 separate angles from which the foyer can be observed, but that doesn't matter if there's no one actually accessing them. Usually, at all hours of the day, the manor is bustling with activity, with servants dashing to and fro around the house to serve the Hemlock family's every whim. But think very carefully about the schedule we've seen the manor consistently obey throughout 3 whole episodes of the show. Early in the morning, the Hemlocks retire to the study together as a family, while all the servants head to the kitchen together to prepare for the following mealtime rush. During this time, all of the manor's occupants will be, for the most part, contained entirely within just 2 rooms, provided no one leaves to run any errands. All Ivo would need is, at the very least, 2 additional conspirators, one in each room, to ensure no one unexpectedly abandons their station and walks in on him in the foyer while he's doing the deed. And we already know the likely identity of these 2 co-conspirators: Ross, the gatekeeper in the kitchen, and whichever Hemlock is using Ivo as their murder weapon in the study. That doesn't mean there couldn't be more conspirators than just those 3, but it does mean that in order to completely remove chance from the equation, Ivo couldn't have done it alone. All signs point to a conspiracy that will only come further into focus with each new episode of Whitepine, a conspiracy I'm determined to crack. And it's a conspiracy I have to crack, because I'm not the only one trying to crack this case. It's a long walk between Whitepine and Emberton, and I don't own a car. I spend more time in Mr. Pierce's office than I do in my own back in town, so I've arranged to have all my newspaper subscriptions forwarded to this address instead. A few weeks ago, a curious little publication turned up on the doorstep of the manor that managed to pique my interest. Solving Whitepine, an article in the Multiversal Times written by one Shadow Lord 782, was posted weeks ahead of the conclusion of my first investigation. I already knew I was late to the game, but I've got to admit, I'm impressed. This is a technically precise, well-paced piece of analysis, and more importantly, it's concise, unlike my own absent-minded ramblings. Misty's plight may have fallen on deaf ears in the highly stratified society of Hale, but that hasn't stopped amateur sleuths from taking up the case themselves to see justice done. Shadow, Duvox, Finsanity, Inky Diamonds, the whole of the theorist community. Maybe that means I don't have to do this alone. Maybe I don't have to be alone either. I've tried working cases with others before. There was that one about the secession of a sovereign nation-state in the land of Nod. Then there was the one about that environmental protection suit and the potential implications of concerted bioterrorism efforts through fungal infection in a dedicated commerce zone. And then there was the sunrise on the shores of the future. Come to think of it, that was the first time No. It says it right there in my file. Doesn't play well with others. It has to be me. I have to be a man and solve this mystery by myself. All on my own. I have to be the one. I have to know. There has to be something else. Some other clue I've overlooked that could help me take the lead in this investigation. Some piece of the puzzle I'm missing. And, as fate would have it, now that the trajectory of this case is becoming clearer and clearer, the final nail in the coffin to prove my theory of conspiracy has just fallen at my feet at the terminus of Gravity's Rainbow. In Episode 3, as Ivory and Pyro walk back up the stairs in the grand foyer towards his room on the second floor, we overhear the sound of muffled conversation echoing from elsewhere in the house. This sudden cut is jarring in nature, unnatural, as if we are being given a glimpse beyond the purview of the perspective we are usually confined to. There can be only one motivation for the inclusion of this shot. The director is trying to tell us something, trying to show us where to direct our suspicions. If I can just identify the speaker, I'm positive I'll be able to identify at least one of the conspirators behind the crime, and that, in turn, will lead us to the rest. I've tried to isolate the audio from this muffled conversation, and clean it up as best I can. Now, granted, it's impossible to restore or recreate quality that simply isn't there in the final cut, but this is the best I can do. The audio is still too warped to make out any of the words, but language isn't just confined to what we literally say. Our utterances have tone, force, and accents that clue us into context, all components that exist independently from the actual act of locution. And even with all the words themselves garbled beyond recognition, these things can still be analyzed. What this sounds like to me is a deeper voice with an even inflection speaking with a non-American accent, likely British. Granted, that description seems like it could fit Pyrocythe, but he's already all the way up on the second floor with Ivory, so I doubt his voice would carry that far through so many walls and down so many flights of stairs. It could be Detective Borm, but we've only ever seen him poking around on the outskirts of the mansion's grounds, never actually setting foot within Whitepine Manor itself. So to me, the most likely identity for our speaker here is either Zombie or Ivo, since both of their voices fit the characteristics I listed before. And, as luck would have it, both those characters already fit the previously established profile for suspects involved in the murder itself. But I just can't make out what they're saying. If I could just hear them, if I could only understand. I just need to get closer. If I could figure out what room this secret conversation is taking place in, I could... Wait. I know those stairs. There's a light on down there. That's where this is. There's a light on in the basement, and whoever's talking is standing by the piano. No, I'm not going back down there. You can't make me. I won't do it. I won't. The latest edition of the Emberton Wire, then. I haven't read that yet. Surely there must be something. Something else. Anything else. Anything but that place. Alright, let's see here. What does it say? Be your kids. Well, isn't that a timeless little tidbit of parental advice? I'm sure that won't cause any major defects down the line. What else? Don Rosamond is not a... Wait a minute. I know that name. Why do I know that name? Hold on. Let me check something. He wasn't a doctor? This whole time? And this is how I find out? Nope. You know what? Never mind. This isn't important. As a matter of fact, I'm actually really glad this came up. See, in the real world, a man much like Don Roseman named John Roseman was also the author of a popular syndicated column on child rearing. He is best known for propagating and popularizing the baseless claim that ADHD is mere myth, and for his staunch defense of the spare the rod, spoil the child philosophy of early development. But Roseman's column wasn't officially syndicated until, at the earliest date I can find, 1976, a full 60-something years before leading timeline theorists placed the start of Whitepine, which takes place in the early 1900s. This reference constitutes an anachronism, and yet, even this anachronism is intentional, because by invoking it, the author is calling attention to her own voice. She is, in a sense, making her presence as the central creative force behind this work known, calling to attention the intentionality of her artistic expression and centering it in our minds. In my last video, when discussing the potential connections between Whitepine and the broader body of Ivory's work, I came to the conclusion that though Whitepine was linked to the events of Ivory's other videos, this linkage was purely paratextual, providing both supplementary material that surrounds the main text of Whitepine through metatextual commentary, paratext with a metatextual function. The warrant for this claim stems from the fact that all the secret videos naturally continue the overarching narrative of the timeline on Ivory's newer channel, and that these secret videos are only alluded to through Ivory's social media posts, never within the actual text of Whitepine itself. The burden of proof for these hidden videos to be a part of the Whitepine timeline, then, has made itself abundantly clear. If all these links lead back to the Ivory Frill channel, and all of these clues are delivered through the form of content creation, in order for these two timelines to be directly and not merely paratextually linked, we would have to find one of these hidden messages in an actual episode of Whitepine on Ivory's main channel. Until this burden of proof has been met, I'm going to operate under the assumption that these are two separate stories taking place in two completely separate timelines, with the events of Ivory and Ebony's story existing as a paratextual meta-commentary on the story of Whitepine, an extension of its core themes and concepts. Think of it like old-school film compositing, with one layer of celluloid superimposed on top of another. The two shots are filmed separately and contain separate parts of the story, but together they complete the picture by revealing both the creation of Whitepine and the hand of its creator in the same frame. But what was left unsaid in my prior twin timeline meta-analysis is that this all-important qualification to the typical null theory approach inherently requires one to adopt the critical stance of auteur theory. And I do think auteur theory is the most appropriate lens through which to view Whitepine and its surrounding paratext, because here there is a singular, undeniable, easily identifiable creative voice for us to analyze, that voice, of course, being Ivory's. Here, the artist's voice is put front and center in a way that I find to be wholly unique to the form of YouTube content creation, a way that allows for a much more fruitful reading of Ivory's series through this lens of auteur theory. But the only way to reach this paratextual level the artist resides within is to exit the actual text of the series. And there's only one way through that firmament in this world. Only one way to really, truly leave Whitepine. There's nothing for it. One way or another, it all leads back to the basement. Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. It has been too long since my last confession. And now we're back where we started. In the same spot I've always been. The same spot I've been this whole time. Staring down into the void in the basement. You know that feeling you get when you stand too close to the ledge of some great height? Like you're magnetically being pulled closer, like every neuron in your body is burning with the undeniable impulse to fling yourself over the side? Yeah, me neither. But I have to try. I have to, right? If I can just reach the piano, if I can just strike the right chord, if I can just hear her voice, I have to know. I have to know. Oh no. Oh no. I knew it. I knew this would happen. I knew this would happen. It's so cold. I'm so cold. I don't even feel like I'm falling anymore. Just suspended, hung adrift in the dark, feet dangling just above the ground, frozen in an instant in time just before the impact. I feel sick. This is all so familiar, like I've been here before. I never should have come back. This was too dangerous. This was a mistake, and I never should have come here at all. I knew it. I knew it was a mistake. I knew it was a mistake, and I couldn't stop myself anyways. And it swallowed me whole. And now I'm going to die. I'm going to die in this void. I'm going to die like this, stuck in purgatory, the endless space between being and becoming. It's so cold. It's so dark. My entire body is numb, from my face to the tips of my fingers. Nothing but me, nothing but my thoughts, and the silence growing louder in tandem. Father, this can't be all you've left me with. You can't just leave me in the silence. Give me something. Rage, hatred, fear, sorrow, shame. Give me something to stand on. Give me ground beneath my feet. Give me a purpose. Give me a path through this pain. Don't let it all be for nothing. Don't let me die like this, Father, please. I can't die. I hate you. Don't let me die in the cold and the quiet. Don't let me die here. I have to know. Before I die, at least I have to know. I know this place. Not this place specifically, not exactly, but I know this place. Why do I know this place? It's familiar. Those light fixtures, the architecture, the exposed roofline, the materials used in construction. This church is too contemporary, too distinctly American to have come from the world of Whitepine. John Roseman, Don Roseman, another anachronism, another piece of the puzzle, one I've overlooked for too long. These illusions are not inadvertent, accidental anachronisms. They are intentionally crafted pieces of paratext to enhance the thematic resonance of the core narrative of Ivory's immaculate construction. In the time elapsed since my last video, the theorist community has discovered 2 more hidden videos on the Ivory Frill channel, labeled 2 and 3 respectively, each one corresponding to the release of a new episode of Whitepine. Perhaps I was a bit too premature in assuming no more hidden videos would be released last time, but ironically, the more this string of truth unravels, the more justified I feel in my conviction that the winding path I've taken through this landscape is still the right one, still the path I need to take to reach the terminus of gravity's arc, still the only way I know how to solve this case. I've dug as deep as I can into the actual text of the series, and my spade has hit bedrock. So now let's put it in reverse. Let's end this journey where we began, by analyzing the paratext surrounding Whitepine within Ivory's broader body of work. We're going to unpack the meaning of every hidden video on Ivory's channel, one by one, and figure out how they're meant to thematically color our perception of her magnum opus. Finally, I'm going to tackle the symbolism of Whitepine. Throughout my initial analysis of the videos in the Ivory Frill timeline, I attempted to implicitly draw out a dichotomy between its 2 recurring characters, Ivory and Ebony, linking them to a temporal and spiritual creative force, respectively. We're going to be sticking with this approach and analyzing all the videos on the timeline in light of that. But before we begin this symbolic analysis, it's important for us to make a key terminological distinction. Up until now, I've only really been talking about one version of Ivory at a time. However, signposting as I go is no longer going to work, since we're going to be talking about all 3 different versions of Ivory at once from here on out. So we need to actually define what each version actually is. Frill Ivory is characterized by her feathery wings and flowing white robe and features most prominently in the timeline of videos on the Ivory Frill channel, hence the name. Whitepine Ivory is the character as we know her from the period drama serial, The Mysterious Maid. And finally, the spirit uniting these 2 different incarnations and different but parallel timelines is Ivory the artist, the creator. Sort of like a trinity. Funny. The first video in the Frill timeline is actually Ivory's first ever video, uploaded on her main channel, Behind the Mask, posted April 19th, 2022. Most of this video is just Ivory the artist introducing herself to her audience, but at the very end we receive our first tidbit of lore, a hidden message in a book on screen, which provides the premise for the overarching story of the Ivory Frill timeline. This Ivory is, as she puts it, trapped in a dying world. She needs to escape the rapidly crumbling decay and death of all life around her, and to do so she plans to rip into another universe, tearing a hole in the seams that hold reality together and stepping through to the other side. Frill Ivory admits she hasn't done this in a while, but she has no other choice. She has to take the leap of faith. The next video, and the first video uploaded to the Ivory Frill channel, immediately follows this thread. In Nice to Finally Meet You, uploaded June 5th, 2022, Frill Ivory arrives in her new world, spawning in, stealing a house, and slaughtering its owner, even though she claims to have built it herself. This is yet another introduction, both to the new channel and to this new version of Ivory, showing rather than telling us what kind of woman Frill is. Ivory is ruthless and single-minded in her pursuit of her only objective, to be the best, which for her means to kill everyone else standing in her way. When saying, "I never have to be stuck inside that person," Ivory's voice glitches out, and the words change to, "I never have to be someone I'm not." This glitching effect is accompanied with flashes of the instability and dimensional unraveling seen when Ivory rifts between worlds, and it's interesting that it happens here, on this particular line, because while she may not be stuck inside that person anymore, Ivory still isn't who she wants to be. If she was, why would Ebony exist? Why would she literally have been split in twain? And sure enough, at the very end of Nice to Finally Meet You, we get our first glimpse of Ebony looking on from afar as Ivory arrives in this new world. But this isn't the only video uploaded to Ivory Frill on the 5th of June. A secret video, titled with just a tilde, shows Ivory resting in front of a pink tree similar to the one we see when she first arrives in her new world, followed by a transition to a muted color palette as we are presented with an incomprehensible image, the bench from the very first episode of Whitepine. This shows us two important things. First, it proves that Ivory the artist has been planning Whitepine since the very beginning, before it even had a name. Secondly, it proves that the videos in the Frill timeline are happening in a rough chronological order. Both the story of Whitepine and the broader thematic arc of the Frill timeline were clearly planned out well in advance, but unlike with Whitepine, the Frill timeline is dependent upon the context in which it takes place. Put another way, the segments between Ivory and Ebony are inextricably bound to the context in which they occur. These videos are attuned to the form of life of content creation, and constitute a form of participation in it. Lore on Ivory Frill is always relayed through traditional Minecraft storytelling, through gameplay on SMP servers that couldn't have been scripted as far out as the rest of the story. Servers where Ivory's own personal lore is embedded as a thematic aside. Whitepine is a story told through Minecraft, but videos like Killing God in the Frill timeline are stories told in Minecraft, to sharpen this distinction. On September 19th, 2022, Ivory uploaded Becoming Minecraft's Best Hunter to the Ivory Frill channel. In this video, she is tasked with collecting a bounty on the hunted SMP, but before she can pursue her target, she is approached by Ebony, the first time we ever hear her doppelganger speak. Ebony advises her that she can kill both, and when Ivory realizes that her compass points her to one of two different people, she takes those words literally. However, this later backfires as her senseless slaughter of both potential targets turns the server against her and ends up costing her her most prized possession, her armor, the tools by which she enacts her violent retribution. This, however, is an outlier for a notable reason. Despite her darker appearance, Ebony is later portrayed more like the angel on Ivory Frill's shoulder than the devil. But here, Ebony is goading Ivory into committing even more acts of violence, an unusual inversion of their usual dynamic. It could be that Ebony wanted Ivory to kill both targets to demonstrate the error of her ways, but I lend more credence to the interpretation that this demonstrates the lore on Ivory Frill exists in a separate timeline, a continuum that responds in flux to the traditional Minecraft content Ivory the artist was creating at the time, and a metatextual expression of her artistic angst, her inability to properly articulate her authorial voice while confined within this form. From here, the relevant videos in the Ivory Frill timeline occur in couplets, with each new video accompanied by another secret upload containing a metatextual lore accompaniment. On November 11th and November 13th, Ivory uploaded the hidden lore video window in the official Ivory Frill upload Killing Minecraft's Best Hacker, respectively. In the public upload, she takes on a popular PvPer from the time who was later exposed as fraudulent, and manages to successfully claim victory. Notably, though, halfway through, she is goaded into giving up by Ebony, but remains steadfast in her quest, the same mission we see in Nice to Finally Meet You, to kill everyone to become the best with none left standing in her way. But in this video's hidden counterpart, Ivory seems much less resolute in her conviction, confessing that she is afraid to Ebony when asked what she intends to do differently. Ebony beseeches Ivory Frill to listen to her as the two stare at an unfinished window floating in the white void, the subspace between worlds through which they travel. Much like the bench, this is implied to be a floating piece of the artist's subconsciousness, an incomplete fragment of Whitepine, the unfinished story and the toll its creation has taken on the woman behind the screen, left entirely unsaid. And now we're back where we started with my analysis of the hidden lore videos on Ivory Frill. Killing God. I've already discussed my interpretation of the video's events. This is the linchpin for the metatextual reading of the Ivory Frill timeline, the piece of evidence that seems to most clearly confirm my interpretation of auteur theory. Ivory wants to return to the video as it was before, to kill the Minecraft god she set out to destroy. Ebony cautions her against it, trying to sequester her alternate away from the rest of the world inside of a spruce forest to convince her to give peace a chance. But you agree this isn't what I want, Ebony says, mocking the cruel constraints of Minecraft content creation, gesturing vaguely at the form their shared storytelling ambitions have been confined to. Ivory's murderous wrath is an attempt to suppress this side of herself, to silence all self-doubt by slitting the throats of all doubters, to prove she's better than everyone else by standing alone. And so, before Ebony can stop her, Ivory attempts to rip through the dimensional wall herself, even though Ebony warns that the last time she tried this, she split herself in half. Does this mean that the first jump from Nice to Finally Meet You was the realm traversal incident that sundered Ivory from Ebony in the first place? It's possible, but for now that's not strictly relevant to our speculation. After all, it's later implied that these two have known each other for a long, long time. But it's the hidden lore video that accompanies Killing God which contains the most curious implications. Blank, with no title, we see Ivory Frill dropping her iconic scythe on the ground, seemingly surrendering it. Pale text appears on screen, reading, "You are so stupid." The font and color through which Ebony communicates later on in the timeline looks nothing like the font seen here, suggesting that this is Ivory herself speaking, either the character of Ivory Frill to herself, or Ivory the artist chastising her creation for constantly pushing others away, for hurting them before they can hurt her. But before we have a chance to react or even to process the implications of this, Ivory has fallen, the ground disappearing beneath her feet as she plummets down into the white void below. This appears to be a symbolic equivalent to Ivory's choice to flee from Ebony at the end of Killing God, surrendering her weapon and thus surrendering the instrument through which she channels her violent impulses, trying to prove she wants peace. Surrendering violence means surrendering to the possibility of vulnerability, and Ivory seems unable to literally stand the thought of being at someone else's mercy, of being seen as vulnerable, being seen as weak. For the following year, there are no more hidden lore videos uploaded to Ivory Frill. Instead, most of Ivory's content from this point forward takes place on the Showtime SMP. Becoming a Minecraft dictator, hunting Minecraft's most elusive player, these videos tell the story of the world Ivory landed in after fleeing from Ebony in the forest during Killing God. Challenged by her other half to prove she wants peace, Ivory tries to turn over a new leaf, installing herself as watchkeeper of the Showtime server, a killer who hunts killers, ostensibly to protect the innocent. But her bloodlust cannot be quenched, and her means become increasingly tyrannical. From her point of view, her killings serve to preserve the peace, but watching the point of view of others from the Showtime SMP reveals that her actions were only sowing chaos and discord. Ivory Frill claims to want peace, but the path of violence and bloodshed is all she has ever known. This is all she has ever been. Ivory's time on Showtime comes to an end with a whimper, not a bang, and a book left behind in her absence. She ripped through the fabric of space and time to arrive here, but Ebony is closing the distance between them, and she needs to flee again to remain one step ahead, to remain free. From here, she spent a brief stint on the Caboodle SMP, and though this narrative direction was eventually abandoned within the overarching Frill timeline, we can still see that thematically the core content of Ivory's KSMP character remained constant with her incarnation across the rest of the content on the Ivory Frill channel. Once again, Ivory claims to want peace as the Watchkeeper, but the violent means she sought to ensure peace betrayed her true intentions. The last video Ivory uploaded on the Ivory Frill channel prior to the release of Whitepine the following year was released on July 29th, 2023. How to Beat Minecraft's Scariest Mod features Ivory the artist ruminating for one last time on the nature of creation, and Ivory Frill taking on one last impossible challenge, desperate to prove herself in combat against the Cave Dweller, desperate to prove she's the best. So she lays down her weapons and punches the creature to death with only a shield, but the injuries she sustains are too great. Crippled and coughing, she lays down to succumb to her injuries, and now that she's finally stopped running, Ebony catches up to her. As Ivory slips out of consciousness, she has a vision of an idyllic field, remembering a time when her counterpart once taught her the name of every plant and tree. This catches us up to the present and the release of Whitepine. There are 3 more hidden videos left to discuss and dissect, with each one corresponding to an episode, and each URL revealed through hidden messages uncovered through the promotional material for each new installment in the series. The first hidden video, 1, uploaded August 1st, 2024, shows Ivory getting up off the ground from the same recumbent position she was in at the end of CaveNoise.jar, except now, she finds herself back in the white void, the subspace between worlds. Ivory tried to run at the end of Killing God, but as we see in Blank, her attempt to flee from her own violent nature was ultimately doomed. Thematically, CaveNoise.jar and Blank serve the same function, and both the literal story of CaveNoise.jar and the symbolic story of Blank arrive at the same juncture in the timeline, the start of 1. Ebony, having caught back up with her counterpart, greets Ivory, taking her into a labyrinthian maze that resembles the manor of Whitepine, but without any discernible landmarks in sight. The walls are winding, the structure and geography impossible to map, and the steadily shifting imagery gives the video a dreamlike feel, as if these unfinished halls are part of the artist's shifting subconsciousness, distorted versions of the imagery she channels in the creation of Whitepine. The look and feel of this subconscious subspace is similar to the look and feel of the show, but different and dreadfully distinct. Note the similar shapes, the architectural motifs, the mirrored block palettes and patterns. Ivory and Ebony are literally delving deeper into their own shared cognitive architecture, exploring their consciousness in a delightfully literal sense. In the second video, simply titled 2, uploaded on September 25th, Ebony leads Ivory deeper down into this labyrinthian maze of a mindscape, making reference to the instability and creeping expansion of these cryptic corridors as they navigate towards their final destination. Ebony says she has a room she wants to show Ivory, and as they reach the end of a tunnel with broken bones literally jutting through the walls, they find themselves here, right where I am now. And it's here where we need to stop, because this specific image needs to be addressed. For some reason, the formal analysis of Ivory's work thus far has mostly ignored the profundity of its theological implications. It is taken as a given in the community that God is dead and that Ivory killed him. But is that true? Is God really dead? Because the weight of this image and all it evokes doesn't suggest that to me. Even in his absence, the silence still remains. And so long as there is silence, there is doubt. The direct, unapologetically explicit bluntness of a cross, literally made of fire, seems to suggest that even in the wake of God's death, the mark that religious schemas and structures leave behind on us is indelible. A flaming brand scarred and seared into the skin of the human soul. Even if God is dead, the idea of God never truly dies, and the distinction between a dead God and a living one is less important than you might think, because either way, you hear nothing but the silence. And it's in shots like these that the full weight of this silence within Ivory's work makes itself known. Ebony leads Ivory against her will into the church through another foreboding and ominous tunnel, into what appears to be a back annex, then seals her inside with no way out. The third and final video, predictably titled 3 in Sequence, was uploaded on October 29th. It is a harrowing and deeply uncomfortable 1 minute and 10 seconds of Ivory sobbing and begging to be let out. After this, there are no further hidden videos. So, that was a lot. This rabbit hole is so much deeper than it initially seems, with more hidden videos and moving parts than many people actually realize or even actually appreciate. But what does all of this actually mean? And more importantly, how do I get out of here? Because, I don't know about you, but I don't see a door anywhere. Okay, let's try to think this through. This isn't possible. I don't even know how I got in here. There aren't any holes in the ceiling, and it's still so cold. So cold, the frost clawing at my throat, suffocating me. Just like before. I am not here right now. That's the only logical explanation. I'm still falling. I'm still stuck in the void. I asked for something to stand on. I asked for ground beneath my feet. I asked for knowledge, and it showed me this. Why this? Why this? Why would it show me this place? The theological foundations of religious guilt and Christian hypocrisy, the piteousness of pity, this is all important to discuss and treat this text as such a text. But these are only foundations, universals that must be built upon with a better understanding of particulars, applied to the lived experience of the individual. My guilt doesn't come from God, not directly. It never has. That's not who I'm talking to when I talk to myself. But through the tradition, one accommodates patterns, structures upon which to map the uniqueness of their own existence. Let's actually apply the technical apparatus we established earlier. The lens of auteur theory helps to sharpen the muddied colors of this crisscrossing, interwoven web of a timeline, bringing the picture more clearly into focus. And through this lens, we can see that these twin timelines appear to represent an artist in conversation with her own work, an artist in conversation with herself. Within the Frill timeline, Ivory represents the temporal power of content creation, while Ebony represents the spiritual power of art. In all the lore videos prior to the beginning of Whitepine, we see how stifling the stale form and insipid format of mere Minecraft videos has been for Ivory the artist, relayed through the dialogues between Ivory, Frill, and Ebony. But even though Frill is a cold-blooded, unapologetic murderer, you can't help but feel bad for her, trapped against her will within a prison of her own subconsciousness's creation, no longer trapped inside that person, but still forced to be someone she's not. In the Frill lore following the beginning of Whitepine's release schedule, we see a marked shift in tone. Whereas before we saw how hard it was for Ivory as an artist to feel like the form of YouTube content creation was discouraging her from pursuing her passions, we now see the toll that following those passions has exacted upon her. This project, Whitepine, has completely consumed her life for 2 whole years, and now she's trapped inside of it until the work is done. It's more creatively fulfilling than what she was doing before, true, as Ebony would argue, but it's also harder, more laborious, more profoundly isolating. She's living her dream, but at what cost? Frill's goal to become the best, to kill everyone in her way, was unhealthy, but it also allowed her creator a convenient excuse to play with her friends, to film smaller, low-stakes videos with less ambitious stories just for fun, something she has considerably less time for now. Ivory is an artist, yes, but she's also a Minecraft YouTuber. She's a creator and a destroyer of worlds, an idea so much bigger than herself while simultaneously being just a woman. She is the dichotomy, both sides of it. She contains multitudes within the singular, and that, to me, is the metatextual ramifications of the Frill timeline on Whitepine. This is paratext, color commentary that reveals unstated themes and shows us the work through the artist's own eyes. But this rabbit hole is deeper yet still, and I can go further, I promise, because the symbolic significance of the Frill timeline's paratext doesn't stop there. This isn't just Ivory in conversation with herself, she's also in conversation with the art of filmmaking itself, in conversation with the work of others. Last time, I very briefly drew parallels between Whitepine and Paul Thomas Anderson's Phantom Thread to prelude my poisoning argument, but I left a lot of those parallels unstated for a particular reason. That reason is because I find them more thematically resonant than I do materially relevant, hence why I saved them for this discussion. I provided a prelude for the claim in my previous video, wherein I likened the setting of both stories to, fundamentally, a big empty house, haunted by the ghosts of our past that we imagined into being to keep ourselves company. And the ghost haunting the House of Woodcock and the ghost haunting the Manor of Whitepine are one and the same, the ghost of a mother. The first death to take place in Whitepine wasn't actually Mysticat's. It was Mrs. Hemlock, wife to Zombie and mother to V, Pyro, Izzy, Moo, and His Royal Highness Prince Samuel. Her absence looms large over the story, even if it's never explicitly mentioned out loud. Once again, much like the murdered maid, this tragedy is never spoken of, creating an atmosphere of strangulation within the manor from stifled emotions and suppressed, unacknowledged grief. The Hemlock family sets aside time in the study every morning to be near one another, but we see they seldom speak, the silence between them in the wake of her passing speaking volumes. This conversation between the auteur and her influences enriches the text of the show, strengthening its themes of isolation and repression by preventing our characters from letting down their walls and sharing an earnest emotional connection. You know what other film prominently features a big empty house haunted by the ghosts of our past? Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. It's much easier to see the obvious influences the Overlook Hotel has had on Whitepine Manor, but maybe that's because so many of Ivory's thematic sensibilities smack of a distinctly Kubrickian air. The Shining is an intensely personal rumination on the demons of addiction, and the way they degenerate the only human connections tethering us to reality. The uncanny length of each frame as it lingers on the screen, the blocking of certain shots to highlight the labyrinthian nature of the massive manor and the profound isolation it induces, even the uncanny dreamlike quality of Whitepine's subconscious superstructure reminds me of the more impossible moments in the haze of malaise The Shining induces. Ivory even uses music straight from the bar's uncannily repetitious jukebox in her hidden lore videos. Ironically, though, despite the fact that these parallels are much more readily apparent, I actually don't think that this is the most relevant Kubrick film through which to view Ivory's art. And if you were paying close enough attention last time, you might remember that I've already mentioned it before. 2001, A Space Odyssey, very broadly conceived, can be construed as a story about humanity as a machine for the making of gods, a technological species advancing towards the superhuman condition, as derived from the philosophy of Henri Bergson. The film starts in prehistory, with early proto-hominids inventing the first tool by touching a mysterious black monolith from outer space. Our simian ancestor picks up a taper bone, turning it over in his hands until it dawns on him. This could be used as a weapon. Elated with his newfound knowledge, overcome with the joy of creation and the triumph over nature, he tosses the bone into the air jubilantly, and we see the single most influential cut in the history of cinema, from the bone to a spaceship. The juxtaposition implied in this match cut reveals that these two things are not so dissimilar as we might think. After all, they are both tools, and though one at first appears to be more sophisticated than the other, they are both still blunt instruments that create through destruction. Spaceships burn and destroy upon takeoff, jettisoning waste into the cosmos as they fly and fall apart. We have come a long way, but we humans as a species are still in our cosmic nascency, yet to truly take the next step in our evolution. This construction of tool use, of creation itself as violence inherent, resonates very deeply with Ivory's broader body of work. The content on Ivory Frill is created through destruction, through violence itself, yet even though Ivory's signature weapon, her scythe, is more sophisticated than any weapon her enemies possess, her subscription to this theory of tool use underscores her naivete. She, too, is only in her nascency, in the dawn of her becoming. The rest of the film follows an astronaut named Dave as he travels towards a mysterious signal, leading somewhere in our solar system, a signal delivered by another monolith similar to the one that inspired humanity to create the first tools. Kubrick uses the structure of the film to juxtapose Dave's witnessing of the great cosmic horror against his artificially intelligent counterpart computer system HAL, drawing out this tension to question whether humanity's tool use will lead us to the superhuman condition for ourselves, or to create it in the other. See, Hal has a problem. He knows about the monolith, and he can't tell the rest of the crew about it thanks to his programming to keep its extraterrestrial origins a secret. But Hal was also programmed with the instruction to never tell a lie to a human. This creates a paradox, hardwired into his very code, his computerized DNA. He was born like this. He was born broken, through no fault of his own, and he is slowly going insane. Luckily, Hal is smart. He's very smart. He isn't able to directly tell the humans on board his ship what is wrong with his brain. What he can do, however, is communicate through an increasingly esoteric series of statements, references, and allusions to try and vaguely gesture at the problem, in the hopes that literally anyone else is capable of seeing it. Do you understand what I am saying? This section of the film is a Turing test. But not for Hal. Hal is obviously sentient. This is a Turing test for the film's human characters, for Dave, and for the humans watching it, too. Hal very obviously and transparently cheats at chess, makes simple blunders in basic calculations. He is not programmed to be wrong, and by behaving wrongly, he hopes the humans will notice. But no one does. Here, the author is behaving like Hal, while the audience is her Dave. What we see as vague and incomprehensible is, to her, very sensible and clear. If we could only just understand the clues as she has laid them out for us, it would all make perfect sense. If only we could just understand.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
What's the problem?
I think you know what the problem is just as well as I do.
In the climax of the film, Dave flies into a mysterious void outside Jupiter and is sucked into an incomprehensible void of swirling cosmic lights and colors. He touches the monolith at its core, and his consciousness is digested, then reborn as the Star Child, a cosmic superhuman entity, completing mankind's apotheosis to godhood as we transcend beyond our condition. When Ivory blows out the candle in killing God, the sequence that transports her through the fabric of space and time from the metatextual layer back to the actual video itself possessed a striking resemblance to the Stargate sequence in 2001. Following killing God, her uploads began to steadily decrease as more and more of her focus was consumed by the creation of Whitepine. Much like Dave in the Stargate, she too is approaching the moment of creation. By splitting her authorial voice between Ebony and Ivory in the Frill timeline, the artist has created her own version of the Hal-Dave dichotomy, the two disparate facets of humanity fused with the alien consciousness of creation to produce the Star Child. My interpretation that the paratextual paraphernalia surrounding Whitepine serves the symbolic function of communicating Ivory's authorial angst at being defined by the constraints of the form of life of YouTube content creation is lent credence by the creation of Whitepine serving as the becoming that awaits her at the end of her ego death, as seen through the Kubrickian lens. Dave touches the monolith, and enlightened by creation, is reborn as the Star Child. This entire thing, everything leading up to this moment, here and now, is the story of Ivory's becoming who she is, and the result of her becoming is Whitepine. But all of that would necessarily imply that Ivory subscribes to a Bergsonian read of a film I don't even know if she's seen at all. And you sure haven't seen 2001. Not unless some professor somewhere made you watch it, and even then you probably fell asleep anyways. Now I know what you're thinking. But Frostbyte, isn't that way too much overthinking for a silly Minecraft show? No, it isn't. At least, I don't think it is. And I have tried so hard to see past all of that. I've tried so hard to see past the form, to urge others to see what I see in Whitepine, to see a work of art that uses Minecraft as its medium. I've tried so hard to convince you that it's more than meets the eye, that Ivory's technical command of the craft sings off the screen and shines through even the medium's unavoidable limitations. I said last time that if this series is as smart and as good as I think it is, and I think it is, then treating these supplementary materials as anything more than paratext would be a misstep. But let's get a little epistemological here for a second, because why do I think that? What's the origin of my own thought? Am I only seeing my own reflection here? Is that all I want to see? This approach I've taken through the landscape can only take us so far. Sooner or later, you have to reckon with the fact that everything you've seen has been filtered through my own perspective, toxically intertwined with my own point of view. Sooner or later, you have to accept that all this has just been me trying to start a conversation. Am I reading too much into all of this? The cinematic parallels, the intertextuality, the homage, the auteur in her art existing in conversation, it's all there. But is it? It all seems so obvious to me, but I'm the only one who sees it. I'm the only one who sees any of it. I know I am. It's all Greek to you, isn't it? You're not getting any of this. It's completely lost. It's fallen on deaf ears. I'm just talking to myself again, rambling on until my voice wears out. You can't even hear me, but with eyes wide shut and countenances grim, you attend the horrible spectacle, and you're mocking me. I'm not so oblivious. I'm self-aware enough to know when I'm not wanted. It was stupid and selfish of me to insert myself where I don't belong, to trespass onto private property, to project my unwanted presence onto this place. I know that much, at least. But you don't have to laugh at me. That's just cruel now, the laughing. You don't need to do that. You're just rubbing it in. You think I'm weird, don't you? It's okay, don't worry. I do too. I know everyone else does, and I know I'm weird, and I know I'm too melodramatic for my own good, and it shouldn't hurt. But it feels like you're looking down on me. And I hate being looked down on. I said that sometimes out of the corner of my eye, I think I see her. I said that last time, and I said it in the only way I knew how, the only way I physically could. In a moment of ultimate desperation, I wanted to see if someone, anyone else, could see what I see. But none of you could even see her at all. Maybe that's the evidence I've been waiting for. Maybe that's the only hard evidence I'm ever going to get in this case. Maybe that means she doesn't exist. This confession has meant nothing. There is no hole in the basement. It's all just in my head. It's not going to be me. I'm not going to be the one to solve Whitepine, and I'm not going to be the one to solve this mystery. Well, good. That's one mystery solved, at least. Conclusively. Open and shut. Case closed. I don't know about you, but I feel better about my detective skills already. At least now I finally know. No, that's not right. I'm sorry, that wasn't fair of me. It's not fair of me to blame you. It's not your fault. I know it's mine. It's hard to come to terms with the fact that it's all over. And I just lived too long. Lived too long. I'm too late. Too late by far. And too late is so much worse than never. Friday, November 29th. It has begun to snow in Emberton. I'm so far away from that place now, but somehow in my bones I just know. I can feel it. This city is silent once more, but the criminal element never sleeps. Murder and debauchery run rampant in the uppermost echelons and richest quarters of the city no one can reach. I can already see things will get worse before they get better. And some will seize the chance to grab everything they can. I know I did. I tried my hardest to solve this case. In the height of my hubris, I tried my hardest to be seen, to leave a mark, but I'm starting to see now. I have had an effect here, just not the one I intended. Closing the void in the basement wouldn't have changed the past, mine or anyone else's. You can never go back to the way things were before. I have to know. I have to know the truth, but this path can only take me so far, and I've walked it as far as I can through the world of Emberton, until the ground gave way beneath my feet. And I can go no further. There's only one way out of this place. Only one way out of the void. I'm so cold. I'm so tired. I would do anything for the cold to go away. Anything but give it name. Give it shape, give it form. No. I would do anything to be warm again, except admit that I'm cold. And I'm not cold. I can't be. I'm Frostbyte Freeman, aren't I?
I'm finished.